ordinary people all around Australia are having strange and unexplainable encounters. Join BFM's Cosmic Girl and Sifu each Friday night at 10 p.m. as they explore the fascinating world of paranormal and tales of strange encounters. Extraterrestrials, ghosts, monsters, myths and magic. BFM 10 p.m. Fridays, the heart and soul of the Bay. Oh, and the spirit along the Redlands coast and beyond.
So it's Friday night, it's 10 p.m, and you know what that means, Cosmic Girl?
Yay!
Yes, it's that time for Strange Encounters on 100.3 Bay FM, the heart, the soul, and the
Spirit of the Bay.
Have we got a fantastic show, a magical show,
Let's hustle about that.
The what?
Let's hustle about that.
Let's
hustle.
Hustle about that.
That's my favourite word at the moment.
Really? Why?
Hustle. I don't know. I saw it in a movie.
Have you been watching any sort of 70s disco type things? Or?
No, not that sort of hustle.
Baz is in the studio. How are you, sir?
Abracadabra.
Abracadabra. Yeah, so he's here. He's materialised. And speaking of magical, I had the absolute privilege of spending some time down at Threefold.
What's that?
Well, that's out at Sandgate. It's a little magical community that's sprung up. Although it hasn't really sprung up. It's been around there for a while. But it hasn't come onto my radar until very, very recently. And I had a really good conversation with Eryk Adish. Now, there's a very interesting thing about that. Actually, he's such a gentleman, and he's a very good sport too, because when I asked him, I met him, I said, "Oh, Eryk, how do I pronounce your name?" And he goes, "Oh, Sifu, it's just think of radish." Just think of radish and without the R, and that's basically so Adish. So Eryk Adish. So when I started the interview with him, I'm thinking to myself, Sifu, whatever you do, don't introduce him as Radish. Don't introduce him as Radish. Whatever you do. And guess what I did?
You did.
I introduced him as Radish. And he goes, and he was so polite. He's a lovely, lovely man. And he said to me, actually, listeners, my name isn't Radish. It's Adish. And I'm like, oh, how embarrassing is this?
Dear.
But anyway.
You've done it again.
Yes, I have. So we're going to have a bit of a conversation with him about what they're doing down there and what the magical community is doing in that space. Also, a little bit more about his growth and development as a practitioner of magic.
So what does he sort of incorporate into the magical community? What does he
do specifically for him? He's following that voodoo line.
Oh,
which is Haitian voodoo.
Is that why you've got a puppet doll sitting here?
Yeah, mate. He's very artistic, Eryk, and I've got a lovely puppet doll which I purchased.
I've never heard of it called a puppet. Have you, Baz? A voodoo doll.
Why are they black? Why are they all black?
I don't know.
It's got white hair.
There's different, like these little trolls that you used to have back in the day.
Yeah. They've sold out of the white ones.
Well, I don't know. I'll have to ask him about that. Maybe that was just some material that he was repurposing, and that's the feeling I'm getting from that.
A pin's extra, are they?
The pins, no, it does not come with pins. Oh. And the way that Eryk explained it to me too, guys, is it's not necessarily a pin thing. So what it is about that intention of, okay, if you put parts of that other person or even yourself. I mean, that's something that you can use. He was saying that, well, I've never heard of that before. You can use a doll like this to do some sort of energy healing on yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
So you can put some mementos, some favourite things, and really connect it with this doll, with this puppet, and then it becomes you.
Yeah, we do that in Reiki.
Yeah, so you can do it like almost through proxy. Yeah,
that's right.
So it's the same sort of. So in terms of using it in a way of promoting health and well-being, the converse can be said as well. So you could be using it to actually personify someone else and cast some malintent towards them.
That wouldn't be nice.
It wouldn't be nice. But actually, Eryk and I have a very interesting conversation about curses and what his take is on cursing, which I think the listeners will find very, very interesting.
I just wondering if those listeners that haven't got one of these dolls could use their Barbie doll.
Oh, I don't. Well, you know what? I reckon you could.
Yeah.
I reckon you could.
Intention.
Everything's all about intention. Don't you think, Cosmic Girl?
I think it could be, but I would be using a Ken doll.
Ken doll.
You might use a Barbie doll, Baz, but I would use a Ken doll.
I wore mine out.
Okay, so Baz has worn his Barbie doll out. Okay, we won't go down that path. But on talking about hustling, we really should be sharing with you guys what's happening in the UFO space in this great state of ours.
Well, since Christmas, believe it or not, because it's been a bit quiet in recent months because, well, I guess for a start in a lot of Australia, sadly, in Queensland, particularly earlier before Christmas, there was a lot of smoke in the sky. Yeah. You couldn't see anything, right? No. But a gentleman and his wife were driving just south of Rockhampton on the Bruce Highway in Queensland on the 20th of December 2019 at 4:15 p.m. Now, they were driving down, it was a clear day. The woman saw a cigar-shaped object with no wings or tail to their right, just above tree height. They were following the road, veering slight left as the object turned slightly right to come along parallel to their vehicle, travelling at the same speed as they were, which was 100 kilometres per hour. Now, the UFO was described as having the same diameter of a small jet and 2 bus lengths long. Now, the kicker here is that it was only 30 metres from the couple.
Wow.
30 metres, that's really close to see something like that going at 100 kilometres an hour. 100 kilometres an hour, yeah. So, anyway, it made no sound and left no trail or haze behind it. And as they progressed for about 10 seconds, the trees cleared for a clear, close view of the object for another 10 seconds. So you can see quite a lot in 10 seconds, right, if you're paying attention. And the woman commented that the object had no wings or tail section at all. The man reported seeing 4 white rings of ionisation around the silver metal fuselage as it started to accelerate past them. So they watched it accelerate for about 5 seconds until it had disappeared into the distance. And it travelled in a direct line about 25 degrees upwards, almost parallel to them, and looked like it went into space. So it made no sonic booms, accelerated to a speed far exceeding any conventional technology. Now,
is there any corroboration?
Not yet. Not yet. Now, he hadn't seen anything like that before. That was the first time he'd actually seen something like that. So basically, we're looking at a cigar-shaped silvery object, 30 metres from a car travelling 100 kilometres an hour.
Bazar, what is your take on this?
Well,
what type of craft is that?
The interesting aspect of that is the ionisation rings around the craft. That's I've seen UFOs at close, 40 odd foot away from me. I don't know how many metres that is, but anyway, that had an ionisation around it, which is like electrifying the air with great energy. So to have that noticed around this cylinder is very interesting, and it almost verifies that it's 100% UFO, because that's the type of effect that UFOs have them around, and our conventional aircraft do not have that effect around them.
Wow. Yeah. That's daylight too, Cosmic Girl, isn't it?
Yes. Wow. At, what was it, 4:15 p.m. So 20th of December, so it's still sunny till like about 7 o'clock at that, or 6:30 at that time of the year. So, and the other thing about it though is it's unusual because we haven't had cigar-shaped objects being witnessed by people for ages, have we?
Since the 90s, probably. Really close range. You know.
Have you seen it like in the 90s? And I think maybe yourself has shared that with me previously, near water?
Yes.
And wasn't there a premise that these things were perhaps vessels that took marine samples or water?
Oh, they were taking large amounts of water up into the craft. Now, there were a lot of reports around the Gosford area, which, curiously is near the Gosford glyphs. But in that area there was Brian Dickinson and Moira McGee who published the Gosford files. They collected all the reports that they could from that area at that time, and there were craft often seen sucking large amounts of water up into them. Now the police were involved in those cases. They knew that it was going on.
Wow.
And in some cases some of the police saw them too.
Yeah, around Mount Warning and Yukai, all around that, northern New South Wales, there was reports, even a video of cylinder in daytime, and school kids in the morning waiting for the bus, or cylinders with their parents and everything like that. There was a fair bit of activity, and cylinders are fairly rare because they're such large objects, but it's interesting to see around the mountains of the Great Dividing Range in New South Wales, that's where they seem to be more noticeable at that period of time anyway.
It's bad enough that we have multinationals and various business consortiums stealing our water, and we have ETs potentially doing it as well.
That's just not right, is
It's
it?
just not Australian.
No.
No.
Oh, Australia, mate.
Yeah, it's Australia.
We want to own our own water.
Yeah, stay away from the water, ET. Okay, so we got any other reports? Now that you're lost. Cheryl's like, Cosmic Girl's lost the plot here, so we're going to keep a straight
no
face.
other reports.
No other reports.
Friday nights on BFM with Cosmic Girl and Sifu.
To magic?
To magic. Yes. Have you guys had any magical experiences? Except the one that you mentioned earlier with your Barbie doll, Bazza. That is not fit for human
Qualifying
use anymore.
magic.
Well, hey,
I gave it to the dog actually.
Let's,
That's
hang
why.
on, let's you gave it to the dog. Funny story. So it's like, oh yeah, let's qualify magic.
Yeah.
Sifu. What do you mean about magic? Well, I don't know, really. I mean, is magic something that we talk about this etheric sort of mystical premise, or is magical something that happens every day and we just don't see it? Is that just another part of our usual human experience? Because a lot of the stuff I talked to Eryk about was all about intention.
Yes,
And it's something that comes
that's what
into-
I'm thinking. If I think about what is magic, I think, well, actually, it's just normal living, but we don't identify it as magical.
So it's a bit of just that little half a degree shift in your perception.
I think so, and a combination of intuition, inner knowing,
Yeah.
and intention, like you say.
And I guess, you know, people talk about white magic and they talk about dark magic. And what do you guys think about that? Is there any such thing as white or dark magic, or is it just magic?
Oh well, I think
Apparently, yeah. I'd categorise it black and white. Yeah, white with good intention and black with
Malevolent.
not so good intention. You know, you don't do it to harm people. That's black magic. You know. If you want to use incantations and spells to cure somebody with a terminal disease, that's white magic. You know, like it depends on the intention of the magician.
Yeah, that's like shamans. They'll do healing, or they can cast spells for wrong reasons.
That's
What do you do, Cosmic Girl? You're a shaman?
No, I'm not.
Yes, you
I just
are.
teach shamanic practices.
Oh, so what's the difference?
Well, I'm not an indigenous person who's been raised in a shamanic tradition. I teach shamanic practices.
So that's your benchmark then,
Yeah.
your baseline for... So you teach shamanic practices, but you don't call yourself a shaman.
No, I wouldn't think so.
And that's because of not being an Indigenous person?
Yeah, not being raised in a shamanic tradition. I know there are some Western people who are known as shamans, like Hank Wesselman and Michael Harner and Sandra Ingerman and people like that. But that's what they do all the time.
Like a full-time thing?
Yes, yeah. So, and they study shamanism and they practice shamanism and they teach shamanism, and it's just their whole world. Whereas for me, I guess, I don't know, could I call myself a cosmic shaman? I don't know, I don't think so.
Urban shaman.
shaman is probably the better word, yeah. So, I teach shamanic practices to open people's eyes to the shamanic life and the shamanic path. So, and because what happens is when you start undertaking training in it, some people will take it further and deeper, continuously, and they will become shamans. But people who are shamans are only called that by other people. So, for example, in an Indigenous culture, someone will not call themselves a shaman. They're given that name by their tribe. So the shaman becomes known as the healer, or the person with precognitive abilities, or they can control the weather patterns, or those sorts of things, or they can know where the water holes are, or they can tell what's coming by studying nature and things like that. So, and they will also call together, they will study the dreams of their own tribe. You know, when there's a problem, they'll investigate their dreams and things like that.
So that's the thing, you know, and I think there's still a major section in the community that would poo-poo all of that. And I guess in talking to Eryk and his space down there at Sandgate, they've had a little bit of adversity that they've had to deal with in terms of what they're doing down there, because really it's a bit of a departure from what the broader community would see as being acceptable or normal. I hate using that word in air
Regular.
quote. Regular is a better word. I think, that's something that you've actually brought up before. Regular more than anything else. And they've actually had like a few, episodes of some minor willful damage and stuff like that down there, which is really, really concerning. So, you think we've come a long way in terms of in embracing and celebrating difference in this country, but sometimes, when things like that happen, you think, how far have we really come? Which is a bit concerning. So let's get into it and take a trip down to Sandgate and dip our big toe in the magical space.
Friday nights on BFM with Cosmic Girl and Sifu.
Sifu here from Strange Encounters. You're listening to 100.3 Bay FM, the heart, the soul, and the spirit of the Bay. Today, I'm in the northern suburbs of Brisbane, Sandgate, believe it or not, and I'm down here with Eryk Adish from Threefold. What a absolutely awesome space it is down here, guys. Let me tell you, it's just fascinating. So, what is it you guys are trying to achieve down here? Now, you have a partner, Karen, as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So Karen is my business partner, and for us, Threefold, really, we want to think of it as a community hub. We want it to be a place where people from all different traditions and practices can come together to experience things in a really safe and inclusive environment.
Okay, so we were having a little bit of a chat earlier just about some of the challenges, I guess, in terms of expressing your own faith and your own religion that you've had to actually deal with. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail for us?
Yeah, so for me, even working in a store that is focused around the mystical and the magical, as a practitioner, or a non-initiate practitioner of Haitian voodoo, I find that for me, even people within these magical communities still hear the word voodoo and think, oh, isn't that black magic? Which of course it isn't, it's a religion that's just as valid as any other. But those prejudices that sort of stick around from the satanic panic of the 80s and the films that we saw during that era, they've imprinted on the sort of cultural understanding of those practices, and even things like, the James Bond films and stuff where these kind of things show up. They've left that lasting impact on our communities here, and that misinformation, that miseducation has really taken its toll, I think.
So would you like to explain to the listeners just a little bit more about the voodoo background, like where it comes from, how it's actually practiced, and I guess how it fits in with normal everyday life?
That's a big question. As an uninitiate, I only am able to know so much and do so much. So a lot of the practices and the beliefs and things are still things I'm learning as I'm going. But sort of in short, when slaves were displaced from sort of Western and Central Africa, they tended to get mixed up with each other from different tribes, and this was to stop them from communicating with one another, so that they couldn't sort of cause uprising, which of course is what happened with the Haitian Revolution. But the practices, so there's this story, and I might get this wrong here, my facts might be a little bit off, but there's a story they tell where the slaves were on this boat and they had been shackled and were being whipped and tortured. And at the end of it, they brought out a saint statue onto the deck of the boat, and all of the African slaves started cheering. And that was because they saw behind that saint the image of their spirits. And so that's a big part of Haitian voodoo. And I've never heard anybody use this term before. I think this is something that sort of comes more from Western mystical systems. But I would say that it's very much an earth-based religion. The spirits that we work with in voodoo are spirits of the mountain, of the rain, of the wind. So they're embodiments of nature. And I think that that's why we see as well such an eco-focus in Haitian voodoo, especially from people who practice it in the West. So it's very compatible, I think, with the kind of Gaia focus of things like Wicca and paganism and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were going through that, Eryk, in my head, that seems to be a fair bit of crossover there. We're talking about elemental forces and tapping into those, and I guess turning inward and discovering that, I guess, in yourself as well, how those elements play within yourself is a big thing. So what's happening on site here? What are some of the things that the locals can expect to be going on in Threefold?
So one of the biggest things we have is a weekly group on a Monday night. These guys are Sacred Space, and they operate sort of in that pagan practice setting, and they celebrate the Sabbats and the Esbats and things like that. So that's a local group for mainly solitary practitioners, people who don't have covens and things like that, who still want to feel like they're part of something, but maybe can't make those bigger commitments. So that's something that's really important to us. But we also have different people who are teaching different classes and workshops, and every Friday we do coffee and cards in the morning. That's 10:30 till 12, and that's a space for people to come and practice their divinatory skills. So we go through and we play with tarot cards or Lenormand cards, or whatever I feel like on the day, and we sort of get to experience that with like-minded folks.
So last night you had some scrying going on here. Were you part of that, or?
As I sort of step further and further down this path of voodoo, there are a lot of restrictions on me, a lot of things that I can't do in other systems. So I wasn't here for the night, but they did do scrying, and I know that I have attended Mills groups in the past, and when they do scrying, we tend to think about like crystal balls or maybe a bowl of water, but Mill actually teaches this really great technique, which is scrying in somebody's eyes.
That's very rare. I've heard of this before, but not many people do that.
Yeah, so when you actually sit there and you maintain eye contact with somebody for 5 minutes in that sort of low lighting of candlelight and things like that, it's almost like hallucinogenic. Your brain starts to twist and warp the person's face, and it's really cool to see like what people experience.
You call it cool, Eryk. Every time I try and do stuff like that, people say it's stalking.
Well, I think there is like something uncomfortable, looking into somebody's eyes for longer than 5 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
And like that actually creates like a psychological and emotional response in us. So to do it for 5 minutes, it's weird how like taxing it is. And I have no self-control, so I find myself just constantly giggling the whole time.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that and putting myself in that space. And I would just, I'd be thinking myself that you couldn't help but establish some kind of link or tether with that person by looking into their eyes for that long. Have you had that sort of reported to you at all?
I mean, I've had that kind of experience. I can definitely say that the scrying partners I've had where I've been doing those kind of practices, it definitely does create a connection or a feeling of sort of sympathy between you.
What do you mean, sympathy?
I guess kind of in that...
That's a really unique word to use. Empathy, I get. Sympathy is a different... Is that what you meant?
Yeah, well, I mean, like when we think about empathy, like especially in like a corporate sense, it's like taking that step back, but having the understanding of what the person is going through. Whereas when you're in that really intimate setting with a working partner, like magically, the self disappears, it dissolves. And I think that's a lot of what people are looking for through faith, through spirituality, through religion, or whatever you want to call it, is that dissolution of self and feeling like you're part of something bigger. And so when I say sympathy, I think it's building that bridge, that link between those two spiritual beings, to a point where there aren't those same lines that you would see through empathy.
Okay, all right. So that makes a little bit more sense. How do we set up for that experience?
Well, I think that different people will use different triggers to get themselves into a ritual mindset. In systems like Wicca, your Western systems, there is that big focus on having a magical persona, that sort of role that you step into when you step into a ritual space. And of course, depending on your tradition and your path, things are going to be different. In voodoo, we have this saying that like the most experienced practitioner should be able to accomplish whatever they're trying to achieve with a glass of water and a white candle. So it's very much about simplicity at first and not rushing ahead. And so I think if somebody was beginning, we use water because water is a conduit for spiritual energy, and the candlelight gives it light and heat. So I think that if you were interested in starting that kind of practice, that's what I would do, is I would start with just a person, a candle, and a glass of water. I don't think that going, I want to work with chthonic or underworld spirits, so I need to get a black obsidian, and I'm going to have to do this and this and this. I think that, especially because, most magicians teach themselves. Most people are autodidactic. So I think that sort of placing rules or expectations on it is maybe not helpful. But in Mill's group, because it's a place where lots of people meet, there needs to be a common ground that they can meet on. And so Mill does her rituals in that sort of Wicca-esque space. So they cast a circle and call in the 4 elements from the quarters and those sorts of things. So I really think that depends on...
So everything's within the circle then? They'll cast the circle, and
Yeah.
whatever ritual will be within that circle?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So, I get that. So I'm going to go back to talking a little bit more about the voodoo space that you're in and you're exploring and devoting a lot more of your time and energy into. Now, you were talking before as an initiate or becoming an initiate, there's a ceremony in terms of a cleansing ceremony. Is that right? What happens with you as an initiate?
Yeah, so I haven't experienced the ritual yet. Right now, my understanding is that the ritual of cleansing, it's called a lave-tete, and so that's the washing of the head, and so it's kind of like...
Quite literally, actually.
Yeah. So your head is cleansed, and they give you this straw hat that you wear, but it's a ritual of cleansing and protection, and it's supposed to cool you down. So we use words like cool and hot to describe spiritual states in voodoo, and it cools you down and makes you more receptive to the spirits, so you can do communication with them clearer and have that stronger relationship with them. During your kanzo, which is your full initiation as an active member of the priesthood, your head is again cleansed and you're crowned. So just like you see in Eastern systems, in voodoo, the head is a sacred place. It's where the spirit sits. So to be crowned with a spirit, to have a spirit placed in your head, is part of that very important process of initiation. And so that's why, even if I was to pick up the accoutrement that a priest would use and tried to mimic the actions, without that experience, without that learning, it's just imitation and role play. There's no power behind that.
Okay, wow. So it's funny, well, not funny at all, actually. There's a lot of crossover here. You talk about that crowning and the head being sacred, and even if you look at, how people refer to chakras and the crown chakra, and that connection to the ether through that space is, it's not it's by no accident, is it? It seems to be something that transcends a lot of belief systems. So.
Friday nights on BFM with Cosmic Girl and Sifu.
There's a current of truth that kind of runs through them all in a way, I suppose. And I don't say that to mean that I think we're all different paths up the same mountain, because to be perfectly frank, I don't. I don't think that every religion is as valid as the other. But I do think that you see those recurring truths come up in multiple religions, regardless of the cultural lens that they're being filtered through.
So, I guess listeners would be very interested to know a little bit more about what actually drew you into this magician space, and what does it mean to be a magician in 2020? What the hell does that look like?
That's a really good question. So for me,
I do ask decent questions every now and then.
I should hope so.
It's pretty rare, but it happens.
Pretty rare. So for me, when I was a kid, I think I don't know who it was, but I heard somebody once say this. It's kind of like a child who, when they're young, they pretend to be a fireman, and they don't know, like they actively know, they're consciously aware that they're not a fireman and that they're pretending, but they know that firemen are out there and they know they could be one. And for me as a kid, I always felt like I was playing at being a magician from a very young age. And I've always been interested in fantasy and sci-fi and the otherworldly. So once I got to a stage where I could start interacting with literature, it really blew me away, because I thought, oh my goodness, here's adults. You know, I was probably 11 at this point. Here are adults talking about magic and saying that it's real. So there must be some sort of path for me. And then very early in high school, I found a local eclectic Wicca coven, and I joined that group and sort of did a year and a day of training with them, and went on to lead my own group for a few years. But eventually the spirits of voodoo started to block the other paths for me and progression in them.
Okay. Sorry, I just got to go. I just got to stop you there. When you say the spirits of voodoo blocked you, what did that look like?
So
how did you know it was spirits of voodoo?
Yeah, I was 17 when I attended my first voodoo ritual, and I'm of the opinion, this could be wrong, but I'm of the opinion that the spirits of voodoo aren't somebody that you can just call up on the telephone. Like, you have to be introduced to them by someone who already knows them, somebody already in the priesthood. And when I first went to that ritual, I had a really strong connection with one of the spirits. And it was mainly through synchronicity, just watching the way that things played out. There's this wonderfully ostentatious ritual called the Rite of Abramelin, and it's 6 months long or 18 months long, depending on which version you go with.
Wow.
And I always thought it'd be really fun to do it, just to say that I had. And I would find things like I would create all these notes in a file on the computer and then go to open them and the file would be gone. Or I would go to meet somebody and my trip would have to be cancelled. Or every time that I tried to take a step in a different direction, something happened that would fall through.
So this was essentially after you were introduced to voodoo spirit at ritual.
Yes.
So you had this introduction, there's a clear connection there, and then after that, any sort of attempt by you to deviate down another path, another magical ritual path, was blocked.
Yeah.
And this happened time and time and time again.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about scrying not being permitted to do that, can you expand on that a little bit for me?
When you enter into voodoo, it's important that before you start to interact with things from other traditions, like paganism or whatever, it's important that you have a firm foundation. So it would be like, it's not as though I can never do those things again. It's just that, especially for right now, I need to be building this foundation and this strong basis that I'm working from, so that when I interact with things like that, I can do it safely and under the guidance of what my spirits want me to do. Because I think at the end of the day, like, this is, for me, a religion. I'm doing what I feel like my God is wanting me to do, what my divine calling is, or my destiny.
It's just really unusual in that. What's your background, like your lineage or genealogy?
So my ancestry is mostly European. I have Hungarian and English and Irish and those sorts of things. So it's all white, all white.
And then voodoo, right? It comes into it, and like I go, so I wonder what it was that's just drawn you to that.
I think, like, I've sort of thought about it, and like, we know from like a scientific perspective that, like, our mitochondrial Eve, the woman who every person on this planet descends from, she was in Africa. And Africa was the petri dish that life was born out of as we know it. So in a way, we all come from that place. And these African religions that, although they've then been, shifted from that native continent to places like Haiti, or you can look at Santeria or Lukumi from Cuba and things like this, they're still African religions that have been displaced. And so for me, I know that, like, if I do go far back enough, that I do have ancestry that came from that part of the world. But yeah, all of my direct ancestors are all 100% white. So it's interesting to me, and I have to be very aware when I'm approaching these spirits to them I look like the slave master. I look like the person who treated all of their people really poorly.
So how do you get around that? In an energetic sense.
I mean, it would be all too easy for me to just fall into white guilt. But I don't think there is productive outcome that can come from that. So I think that, like in all things, the best thing I can do is sort of lead by example and try to stay humble. And like, I think that in the West, I mean, even listening to myself speaking now and the words that I'm using, I'm intellectualizing all of this. And
could that be counterproductive?
Yes. Yes, it's not like I asked my mentor the other day, is voodoo orthopraxic? Is it more about what you do, or is it orthodoxic and more about what you believe? And they don't use those words. Like, they have no interest in that conversation. It's just me and my white brain intellectualizing everything. So I think that for me, it's really about surrender and coming back to just doing what I'm being called to do at the time.
That whole surrender theme seems to be something that, talking to a lot of people, is coming up time and time and time again. How hard is it, Eryk, to actually let go and flow and surrender? It's easy to say. You have to laughing at me now. How hard is it? It's one of the hardest, if not the hardest, things we can do as humans.
Yeah, definitely. I have always been like, very much like, if I want this to happen, I've got to make it happen. And I'm one of those people, it's like, you know, I'm going to do it myself, because if anyone else does it, it's going to be wrong. So you're right, to surrender, to just give in and say like, okay, spirits, I will trust you, and whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it, and I'll just go with the flow. Actually doing that is really hard, and I consciously have to remind myself not to be impatient, not to rush ahead, to slow down and just
hold space.
Yeah. Do, like, if I'm gonna do something, it's that next thing. It's, you know, it's just going out and buying some white candles and some wine glasses. Just doing that and nothing else. But like, yeah, I am very gung-ho, and I'm very excited, and it's new and it's fun. So it is hard for me to have that self-control to stave off from diving headfirst into all of it. Yeah.
It's very fascinating for me, because just talking to you, I get that you're highly articulate, you're very intelligent. But the issue is, though, and we find that, is it can be to a detriment, overthinking. And it usually does. And that's where stuff sort of tends to come unstuck, and it sort of derails intuitive practice or intuition as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think as well, like, you know, when you're talking, I'm thinking of, so like we get this out of Greek culture, this idea of Apollonian thought and Dionysian thought. And so like the Apollonian thought from Apollo is very intellectual. It's about reason and logic and all of those sorts of things. And like the religious practices that surrounded Apollo were very much like that in ancient Greece. Whereas you look at Dionysus, and he was the one who was having, you know, the frenzied orgies and the drunken parties as his religious celebration. It was about feeling, it was about ecstasy and experientialism. So experientialism, I don't even know if that's a word, but they were experiential. So yeah, like I think that I need to have less of that very logical brain and just more about like doing the thing and experiencing the thing and what I actually get out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. This time of year, Eryk, you see a lot of people looking to make some massive changes in their lives. Yeah, they're looking new year, new me. They're starting a new gym membership. You know, they hit that diet. They suddenly decided to go vegetarian, or they're cutting down alcohol or giving away smoking, and all that sort of stuff. And they're trying to plan. A lot of people are planning and overthinking and really throwing themselves and immersing themselves in a change of behaviour. What sort of advice, from a magical perspective, if you're talking about it in terms of what you've done and what you've immersed yourself in over the years, what sort of advice do you give people that are looking to make those massive changes for the better in their lives? Oh. Can magic play a part in that, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I definitely think so. So I tend to think about magic, like practical magic, as in like, you know, talking spells and potions and things like that. You know, they're a bit like The Secret. They're more about getting things. But there's no like ethics or morality behind that. It's just a thing to get stuff done.
Just cost. You've always got to pay the piper.
So I think that, you know, a lot of those sorts of things come down to self-control and training the will. Like willpower is one of the most important things, especially in those Western systems. You know, they have phrases like "do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." You know, and so it's all about the will. And when they use that word in Western mystery traditions, they're talking about true will or destiny, your purpose. And Aleister Crowley, he's a very famous occultist and mountaineer, and he always said that man has no right to do anything but what he wills. So it's about doing, I guess, the right thing, and I guess like all any of us can do is go to bed at night and hopefully be able to say, I did the best that I could today. And I don't know if we should expect more than that from ourselves. And I think everybody's normal is different. Some days, you know, like I just throw this out there in the middle of the conversation, but I suffer from anxiety and depression, which is probably good to mention to normalize that kind of thing. And some days, getting out of bed is a chore. And if I manage to get up and feed my cat, that's a successful day. So I think that we put a lot of pressure and expectations on ourselves when any change, I think, especially if it's coming from external places, like that's never the point it needs to come from. It needs to come from within yourself. It needs to be something you're meant to do, that your will is there.
That's I guess, I think you've hit the nail on the bloody head right there, because it does have to come from internal. There are a lot of pressures, social media pressures and other external pressures, peer pressures are unrealistic, bogus, totally created, fabricated norms that people, unrealistic norms that people are striving to live towards, and they're missing it. They're missing their callings. They're missing living a life close to spirit, which is their bigger life. So I guess what you're saying then, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just paraphrasing, if you just surrender and you quieten your mind and you work out what your purpose is, your bigger purpose is, everything else will fall into place. You'll have the will to make that happen. And if making that happen is getting in better shape or kicking the drug addictions or whatever, you will have the will and the fortitude to make that happen, because you see yourself being driven by a higher purpose, something bigger than just yourself. Would that be fair enough to say?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think, we all do it. We all look at celebrity Instagrams and think, why isn't my life like that? And a lot of times we don't realize that, oh, that's right, even their life isn't like that. That's just what they're putting on display. But yeah, I think, it really is about that willpower. And like, I think as well, like, no matter what spiritual path you're in, and even if you're an atheist, practices like meditation, which are prescribed by doctors now, like it's secularly understood that meditating is good for you. And doing those mindfulness techniques and things like that, I shouldn't say that's good for everyone, speak to your healthcare professional, but it's helpful to build up that will, to build up that self-control or that self-awareness even, so that you have that willpower to make those changes.
It's again, using that term, self-awareness, a lot of people live in denial and they run a mile. I guess they'll do anything to avoid looking inwards.
Yeah.
And that's where the magic happens, and that's where the power of ritual is, I believe.
Friday nights on BFM with Cosmic Girl and Sifu.
Yeah, but it's also scary, we're so ingrained with like fight or flight responses. We think about it, and we think about the phone bill and the electric bill and the rent and, all these things, and we're looking at those as if those were the lion, and they activate that fear response in us. So we're constantly on heightened anxiety. And I read somewhere that with social media and Facebook and all these sorts of things, even just like television, we absorb so much experience in one day, because like your brain doesn't tell the difference between what's on the TV screen and what's actually happening around you. Like the emotions, the chemical reactions are the same. And so like we experience in one day more than our Neolithic ancestors would have experienced in their whole lives. Like we're so overwhelmed. And I think for a lot of us, just taking that step away and sitting with yourself and just taking 30 deep breaths can cause huge shifts. Something as simple as that, when stuck to for every day for a month, can make really dramatic changes in your life.
Well, even that whole thing, unplugging from the technology is a big thing. And easier said than done, because it's quite an addictive drug, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like, as a business owner, we have Threefold, and Threefold has its Facebook page. And so I need to be on Facebook. I need to be on Instagram, because that's part of running my business. But I do find myself, I'll go in, I'll do something on Threefold's page, then I'll click the home button. And I'll start going into this scroll hole, and just an hour passes and I've been unproductive, and I sort of come back to myself and I go, oh my goodness, look at what you've just done. And you're right, it's such a norm, and like I think about like my nephews. I don't have any children myself, but like my young nephews, and their entire lives they've had an iPad in front of them. They don't even know any different. This is what the world looks like to them. And I imagine that it's only going to be harder. I grew up in the 90s and watched technology evolve as I grew. And so to watch them and the way they interact with it, I can tell it's going to be only harder for them to maintain that sort of self-awareness.
Wow. Look, this is it's just fascinating. Like what you were talking about, simplicity is a theme that keeps coming up again and again and again. Simplicity. And even in the voodoo tradition, you're talking about if you can't do it with a glass of water and a white candle, then you're really not a real skilled practitioner of the craft. But I think we lose a lot of our focus and our direction with just complicating our lives with stuff that we don't need. With all the fluff, and even the stuff that we don't need, not just in terms of material stuff, but in terms of those expectations, feeling those obligations that we have to other people. I hate obligations. We feel obligated. We do things because we're obligated to. We don't need to. So, Eryk, just in terms of your paranormal experiences, have you had some really strange paranormal experiences over the years that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Oh, I sure have.
Where do I start, he says.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, though, because like when we talk about these things, they sound so unbelievable. But I kid you not, I have seen somebody levitate off the ground.
Right.
And this was witnessed by a whole group of us. The high priestess of the first coven I did my training in, there was this really strange and very scary ritual. It was scary for me, I guess. Because
is this local, Eryk?
Yeah. So the coven was based on the north side of Brisbane, in Launton. And we used to do our rituals at the Launton Cemetery there. And so we've had a very good relationship with the police station around there. These strange people doing rituals in the cemetery. But they're very okay with that.
Why the cemetery?
Our patron goddess was Hecate, and she rules over in-between places. And so because the cemetery is that place where life and death meet.
Like liminal energies sort of thing.
Liminal energies, exactly. So there's a crossroads at the back of the cemetery.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
So we used to do our rituals there, and so it had it was a very potent location, and it was right near the train tracks as well, which I kind of think of as like a modern ley line. So yeah, it was a really cool place to do our workings. But yeah, during one ritual, all of us, there was about 13 of us in the group, and we all saw her lift a few feet off the ground. So that was probably one of the most incredible things I've ever seen manifest.
Was she standing or laying down, or?
She was standing.
Right. So she's basically just left the earth.
Yeah, and like during the ritual, like she was actually possessed by the goddess at the time. So we'd done a ritual to sort of bring the goddess down. They call it drawing down the moon in Wicca, and she became possessed of the goddess, and she rose up off the ground, and like it was again one of those very like hallucinatory experiences, and you know, I saw her shape shift and change and things
into
like
what?
This. It was into this like very grotesque sort of monstrous visage, and so that's why I remember the event as being scary. But I don't think that was the same experience everyone else had. It was just because of what I was seeing at the time. But yeah, it was interesting, and I love those kind of things because it does make me wonder, like, you know, there's all this conversation about like group hallucination and things like this, like mass hysteria. So I think it's very healthy, at least for me, to sometimes take a step back and go, oh, that's right, this could all just be in my head.
But isn't everything in your head? Like, I've had this conversation with people before. Like, oh, it's all right, Sifu, it's just in your head. And I go, well, isn't that where everything is?
Yeah.
Our perception, our interpretation of reality, our link, how we our perception of reality, how we engage everything within our reality, within our space, is all in our head.
Yeah, I love that quote by Lon Milo Duquette, and he says, "It's all in your head. You just don't realize how big your head is."
Well, I was watching some stuff just with some brain science stuff the other day, and just neurosurgeons and people that do a lot of work with the human brain, and as much work as they've done in understanding how it works, they still don't have a clue. You know, the neuroscientists, the best in the world, they still don't really have a clue how this thing works. But that's not what's remarkable. That's just basically water's wet, sky's blue type stuff, observation, right? But we all have one.
Yeah.
That's what I find absolutely mind-blowing, pardon the pun. But we've all got this absolutely incredible, whatever it is, you know, we've all been issued with one, yet, and our intellect comes from that, but we just don't know how it works.
Yeah, and I think like I think it's more nuanced than the phrase or the axiom sort of goes, but like change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. And like in sorcery, we name things, we call them what we want them to be. So it's like when I'm doing spell work, if I create like a puppet doll and I put your hair in it and your photograph and I call it you, what happens to the doll happens to the person. So we name things when we're doing sorcery, and I think that there is power in that in our other spaces of our lives as well. It's like the name or the title that you give to someone, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, these kinds of things as well. It changes your perception of them. It changes how you interact with those things. And so I think that like sometimes that process is as simple as calling it something else. And that sort of helps us to get beyond that kind of thing. I think as well, you know, like sort of what we were talking about before, there's so much division, and it's like I end here and you start there, but it's not really quite that simple, you know.
Well, it's not the truth anyway.
Well, that's right. And like, you know, going back to Crowley and quoting him again, he says that the perfect and the perfect are one perfect, not two. And what he sort of means by that is like there is nothing else. Like everything, it's sort of pantheistic. Like everything is all one. But like as well, it's that whole thing about how we're spiritual beings having a human experience, not humans having a spiritual experience. So I think that that's like, yeah, again, it's that shift of perspective, that turning things upside down that makes you see them for what they are.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. So levitation was a big one that you've seen. Anything else? And in your rituals?
Yeah, I mean, we played with Ouija boards and, you know, spirit boxes, like the radio frequencies that...
Well, hang on, Eryk. You cannot use the term play with Ouija boards, as I found out doing this show, because some people get offended by the term play. I'm only kidding. You can say whatever you like.
Well, I think, you know, look, they're made by Hasbro. They're a board game. They've always been marketed that way.
Well, they're currently licensed as and trademarked as a board game.
That's right. So I do like to remind people that at the end of the day, it's just a game made for children. And
Ages 10 and up, I think.
And that's not too, like, because as well, I think, we see a lot of attempts to devalue things, and, like, people get very upset when you say things like it's all in your head, and it's like, we don't say that to minimize it. We say that to elevate the imaginal to equal as consensus reality.
I love that. See, I love what you're saying. So, guys, I guess what Eryk is saying, and paraphrasing what you're saying, is it may be, on the face of it, a board game, but what we call it, the intention we put into it, is a bit of transmutation. So then it takes on something completely different. And that's where the power of it is. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
And this is what some people don't understand when we say play with. It's not in terms of a derogatory term or anything like that. It's the intention that you put into whatever device. And that's something that I love about what you've just advertised as a course that you're doing. In particular, it's not tarot. It's something I haven't heard of before. But it's a simpler version of tarot using playing cards, right?
Yes, so...
What was that called, Eryk?
So the system is called Lenormand.
Lenormand. I've got to remember that. And sorry to cut you off again, but I think, that's absolutely fascinating when you look at something like as simple and as common as a deck of playing cards that we can transmute into a tool for divination. Love it.
Yeah.
That's amazing, right?
Something that everybody has in the shelf. And I think as well, like, when we think about magic, we think about these guys in their weird robes with ceremonial wands and all.
Come on, Tommy, you would have to have your own weird robe.
Oh, absolutely.
That's just part of the course, right?
Yeah. I still want all the fun toys, even if I don't need them. But like we conjure to our minds images like that. We imagine pentagrams painted on the ground and all these sorts of things. Whereas like magic is actually much more down-homey and accessible than people think. And they'd be surprised the amount of things they could pull off just with the herbs in their cooking cabinet. So, like, to bring divination, something that has typically been associated with priesthoods and, something that is elitist and you need to be taught, to bring that down and back into the hands of the masses, because as well, like, I have a very strong opinion that magic is not for the 1%. That's not who it belongs to. They're not the ones who need it. They have other resources that they can use to get the things they need. It's the mother who is thinking, how am I going to keep my kids safe from the plague that's making the witches' bottles? It's not, the high French ladies who are doing this. So it magic belongs...
It's out of necessity. It was born out of... And same with voodoo, out of necessity.
Yeah, magic belongs to the minorities, the oppressed. And I think even when you look at voodoo, there's that syncretism. Like, they had to hide their beliefs behind Catholicism and make their practices look Catholic just to survive.
Hide in plain sight.
Yeah, exactly. So, like...
That's what I try and do. Is it working?
No. So, yeah, I think... Oh, I don't even know where I was going now.
Sorry to derail you. I do that from
But-
time to time.
Lenormand, going back to that topic,
yes.
I love Lenormand. So she is the epitome of that concept of the masses having the magic, and it being in the lower people. So she was originally born in a convent. So Lenormand is named for Marie Anne Adelaide Lenormand.
And an interesting life she had.
What an interesting life she
Getting
had.
out of jail too, I believe.
Yes, because of course fortune telling was illegal.
Of course.
So they kept on throwing her into prison for it, but because she was so useful, they'd let her out again. And I actually remember there's this one story about her, and she's in prison, and one of the guards says, oh, you're going to die in here, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, well, actually, I've seen my astrology chart, and I live to a great age. So they let her go because they believed her prediction. Like, they knew that she was going to just live in their cell forever if they didn't let her go. So they released her because she told them she'd have a long life. Wow. And, like, she read for Napoleon's wife and, really high aristocratic members.
Did she say to her just to be wary of short people?
I couldn't say. But, even the stories about, like, her reading room, they talk about how it was, like, painted with, like, Kabbalistic glyphs, and there was taxidermy bats hanging from the ceiling and all these sorts of things. Like, she really incorporated that performative element. So when she passed, card creators who made what was called the Game of Hope, they actually took her name and applied it to the deck. And they claimed that these were the cards she read with, and that you too could read like Madame Lenormand if only you have this deck. So that 36 card system is what we now think of as Lenormand cards. And so on Wednesday this week, which will be the 15th, which is probably before you guys are listening to this, but I will be teaching a workshop on the Lenormand and teaching about the history of them and about Marie, and also about like their function in everyday life. Because I think that with tarot, so much of the imagery and the stories and things, they're all very centered around Christian mythology, Christian
God,
imagery,
divine,
and connection with God. So like when you do a tarot spread, 9 times out of 10 the answer is get good with God. Whereas Lenormand cards, I find, are a little bit more down to earth, or a bit more down homey. They're the kind of cards you can ask, how am I going to pay my rent this week? Or
So I've just got the listeners would be really wondering about this, Eryk, is say, okay, we do a card spread, whatever that looks like in that system, and I ask the question, how am I going to pay my rent? What is a typical answer, or a series of answers that may present as a result of that?
You know what? Sometimes the answer may not always be obvious and direct. So I'll tell you a little
Get a job.
Well, sometimes it could be as simple as that. But I'll tell you this story about something that happened in my own experience with a divination that I did. But I was communicating with an angel, and I was using the cards, and I asked them, like, how can I grow my business? How can I get more people following me? And they said, you need to take some fabric and you need to paint a magic circle. And I thought, okay, I can do that, but what do I need to do to build my business? And again, the response came, get some fabric, paint a magic circle. So even though the answer didn't seem directly related, I painted the magic circle. I filmed a time lapse of the magic circle. I put it on the Facebook. I put it on the YouTube.
I've actually seen that. That's brilliant.
And it got a lot of views, a lot of spreading it around.
And actually, that's how you got onto my radar.
Oh, well, there you go. So
I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing.
Oh well, I was pretty happy with my work. But yeah, it was something that it didn't look related, but it was definitely. And like I got the response, the reaction from people that my angels said that I would, by doing this thing that seemed completely unrelated. So the advice that comes from the cards may not be as simple as you should apply for a job in childcare or whatever, but maybe something that seems unrelated. Like you need to call your mother and sort out the argument you're having, and then you'll get a job. Like, because these things, there's this expression in occultism that light moves the dark, and the light is like the light of God or the spirits or whatever you want to perceive that as, and the dark is the material world. So when that light is moving the dark, it's not always in the ways that it seems. It's more subtle. Yeah. And like time doesn't work the same for them as it seems to for us. And so there's all this nuance and things seem unrelated, but once you learn how to see the synchronicities, it all becomes much clearer.
And isn't it funny how you don't really recognize the significance of the synchronicity until after the event?
Yeah, definitely.
You look back and you go, oh, wow.
But it's like, if you did a spell and you were like, I want a new car, and the next day you found a toy car on the street. Not what you were looking for, but it is a sign from the universe that it's on its way, that you're on the right track, that your spell is working. It's just going to take some time. So it's by, like, when you work in a magical mindset, little things, like, I don't believe in coincidence. I don't think there's any such thing. I think that, like, everything does happen for a reason. But it's just whether or not we can perceive that and whether we can get it right. And I mean, as well, with, like, divination and fortune telling, like, the cards will always lay correctly. Like, your prediction, your interpretation of the cards might be wrong. But if you look back in 6 months at those cards, you will then be able to see how it played out. So the cards are always right. It's just whether or not the person interpreting them gets it right.
User error.
Yeah, user error.
Okay, so I guess if we were to accept that magic is real, there'd be a lot of listeners out there will be going, oh wow, I could use this for a whole lot of different reasons in my life. Say, how to attract that perfect partner into your life. Is there a simple spell that you know of that people can use? I mean, you probably get that asked a lot. The converse to that, which we'll get into in a second. But a lot of people going, oh, I just can't, I've just got to attract this partner. How do I do it? Is there a spell or a ritual that they can do simply to manifest that into their life?
Friday nights on BFM with Cosmic Girl and Sifu.
Absolutely. I mean, I would take some fabric. I would cut out 2 human figures, put something of yourself inside of one of them and stuff it. And then
This is a voodoo practice, yeah?
No, we don't.
Really?
No, yeah. In Haitian voodoo, there isn't really dolls. Puppets, what we think of when we say voodoo doll, you can't see the air quotes, but I'm doing them. When we talk about voodoo dolls, they're actually puppets, which are a European invention.
Yeah.
So when we're creating puppet dolls, it's actually more like English folk magic than Haitian voodoo. But yeah, I would create 2 puppets. I would fill one with personal effects of myself. I would write a list of the qualities of the person I'm trying to bring into my life, and I would put that list in the other doll. Then I would tie the 2 together.
Okay, when you're binding, what are you using and any specific way of tying that you use?
Different systems will give you different prescriptions, and I think that's sort of where training is so important in magical systems, because you need to have those basics. But in the Western systems, they would normally work with love as being Venus, of course, and Venus's color is green, so you could make the dolls out of green fabric and bind them with a green ribbon, because when you're doing a spell, you want everything in it to be like the thing you're trying to achieve. That's the rule of what we call like concentration. So you're concentrating all of it into this one pinprick focus to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve. There's this phrase that, like, magic, it's what happens when the mind meets the world and the mind wins for a change. So yeah, that's how I would approach it. But I think as well, we go into, like, oh, well, what about the incantations? What about, casting a magic circle and all of these sorts of things, when, like, for most folk magic people across the world, if you did A, B, C, X, Y, Z happens. And that's how I think magic should work.
Cause and effect, yeah.
Yeah, it should
Very
be
simple.
straightforward. It should be simple. I think that we tend to overcomplicate it in a lot of cases.
Okay, so we cut out the effigies or the human shapes out of the fabric. We fill it with, we fill one of them, 2 of them, and one of them is with parts of ourselves, things that are special to ourselves. The other one is it contains qualities or traits that we want to attract an ideal partner, and then we bind them in green. Color of Venus is very important. The way we bind them isn't particularly important, do you think?
Again, I think
Trick question?
I think different traditions would have different rules, and
How would you do it, Eryk?
If I would just tie it, I would tie it in a bow or something. I think that it should be aesthetically pleasing to you. You should look at it and it should almost be like an art piece. So you should put as much care and as much focus into it as you would if you were about to put it in a museum to show us as an art piece. And I kind of think that way as well with altars. Your altar is an installation piece of art that you're sort of creating as a devotional practice to a spirit, or many spirits. So I would sort of approach it in that same way. I think that just coming to it from sincerity is probably the most important thing. I think that a lot of spirits, especially as you're beginning, would be very forgiving. But in many systems, they don't believe that humans have personal power, that all things are done through the spirits. So the previous system that I was working in professionally, which is based on the Key of Solomon, which is a wonderful 15th century spellbook. And it works with a Christian mindset, a Gnostic Christian mindset. And so in that system, the only power that humans have is that they've been made in God's image, and they have authority over the angels and the demons. So when we work magic in those systems, the only power we have is to command those spirits.
What do you believe? Do you believe we have some inherent power?
My experience tells me that there is power in the body, and I think a lot of cultures have that view of mana or prana or ki or chi or, all these different names. And it's, again, one of those things that you see everywhere. So I think that there is some sort of power within the body that we can draw out through things like dancing and chanting and drumming. But I do also think that there are independent external spirits who have their own will and agenda, and that working with their power is maybe greater than what we as an individual can muster.
Or an accelerant at the very least, hey?
Yeah.
So, back to the dolls, Eryk.
Yes.
So we tie them. What do we do with them?
Well, I guess that would depend on your preference. You could bury them in the ground.
It's a bit morbid, isn't it?
Well, we would do that because the earth in a lot of systems is the mother. So when we dig a hole in the earth, it becomes the womb in which our spell is born. So I would, you would be able to work with that earth energy to bring that spell into being. But you could always take them to the ocean, or you could set them on fire to bring a lot of heat to that next relationship and a lot of passion to that relationship. So in Western systems especially, we tend to work with the 4 elements. So earth, air, fire, water, and you would find some way to incorporate your spell and finalize it through one of those elements.
Okay, so I guess the converse of that, we talk about protection spells. And I don't think it'd be responsible for us to talk about ways of, and I don't really believe in it anyway. I guess there would be a context where it would be appropriate, but doing harm to others or projecting any sort of harm to others. But in terms of self-defense, setting up a protection grid or detecting whether someone has actually placed a malevolent intent on you, how do you pick that up? How do you pick it up? A, is it possible to pick that up? And B, how do you protect yourself from that?
So with protection, and I think as well, sort of touching on what you're talking about as well, when we're working magic, you're talking about harm and intentions. When somebody does you wrong and due process fails you, what more do you do? So I think that in those kind of cases, if somebody's been abused in an abusive relationship and, they've gotten out of it and tried to take them through court and no ruling has been met and they didn't win and nothing happened.
Could you let go of it?
Well,
there's a lot of spiritual,
yeah,
I guess, ways of living and thinking that would say, let go, forgive, send them your blessings, and let karma sort it out, as opposed to attracting your own.
See, that's a whole other conversation. I don't really buy into karma. I think that karma in that Eastern system is much more about cause and effect. When they're trying to reduce their karma, they're trying to reduce the impact they have on the world. They want to leave as little impact as possible. And that's what karma is about. Karma is not about you'll get back what you send out. Within those Eastern traditions, that's how we think of it in the West, but it's not necessarily how they're using it. And so for me, a big thing is if you're being wronged, is asking for justice. And I think as well, in those kind of situations, we feel powerless and we want to do something. And even if magic's not real, even if, like I was saying before, it's all a psychological experience, at least that person has done something, been active and willing in their own life to make change, to cause change. And I think that even if that change is an internal one where they feel like they've, even though everything else didn't work, they did something that helped. Yeah.
What if it doesn't help? Isn't that going to have a negative effect on that whole psychological, that whole healing process?
Well, I mean,
Well, we don't see it work. That's the thing too.
Yeah.
Unless you're a super stalker extraordinaire and someone's done you wrong, you're not going to be sitting there on your porch watching and surveilling to see, so that you can see the day come where he or she gets hers. So it might actually happen and you don't see it.
True.
So there's no closure there, potentially.
Well, I mean, as well, like, you know, it's like if you were abused by somebody or treated poorly by somebody and the next day they died, like, can you still get closure from that even if you can't communicate and connect with them? And I think, yes, you still can. I think it would be silly to suppose otherwise. But I guess, like, my point is closure doesn't always have to be involving the person who's wronged you.
All right, I see. Yeah.
So just being active and doing something can be your closure.
Well,
that can
part of-
be your final step.
Part of the healing and
yeah.
recovery. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that anger has a place in that process. And if you want to curse somebody, I think you're perfectly within your rights to do that. You know, if that's the only option you have left, what more can I expect from people? You know? And like, I don't claim to be walking any sort of moral high ground. You know, I've done curses in the past. But in those moments when I felt like there was nothing else I could do, I remember, to get a bit personal here for a moment, I was gay bashed at one point in a parking lot. And once I'd managed to finally get myself home after that horrible experience, I hit my knees, I went to the altar, I prayed to my gods, I asked them for justice, I asked them for things, and that was what was able to make me feel safe enough to be able to go to bed that night. And like, even if nothing happened after that, even if nothing ever happened to those people who did that thing, it still gave me security and, you know, made me feel like I was safe again.
Yeah, so you're basically using magic to address a power imbalance because you feel vulnerable. So just in terms of, again, revisiting what we were saying about something like a protective thing, or actually we'll take it a step back, we're talking about detecting. How can you actually pick up whether someone's either cursed you or there's some sort of malicious or malevolent intent being sent your way? How can you pick that up?
There are two things I would probably mention. The first thing, I don't know why this has come into my head, but I feel like I'm sort of being called to say it, is wind chimes. People will often put wind chimes inside their house, inside near the front door, and like, spirits are polite. If somebody evil is coming into your house, they will still use the front door. So when they come through that door, the chimes ring. So it's good to have it in a place that doesn't really get an air draft, because that can, and then like people use it as like their spiritual alarm system. So that's always a really great way that like people can do that.
I have never, Eryk, heard of that before.
You've never heard of that?
No.
Oh, well, there you
I
go.
love that. Yeah, that's awesome.
People hang wind chimes in their house. Another really common thing, you know, the spinny whirly gigs.
But yeah.
Yeah,
but you see at the fair.
Yeah, that you see at fairs and things. People will put them in their front garden because spirits love colours and things that turn, and they get distracted and like will get lost trying to find your house and run away. So those kind of things are really good, simple, down-homey things you can do. But if you're moving through life and like your roads are blocked and things aren't working for you, and you know, there's that potential there that you're cursed, or even if somebody comes on Facebook and publicly claims that they've cursed you, the most important thing is going to be divination. So I mean, I personally would be going to my priest and getting him to read for me on that situation and seeing what the spirits have to say. Because it's not only good enough to know that you have been cursed, but it's important to know how you've been cursed, by whom, where it came from, how they do it, so that you can then dismantle that in the proper ways with the proper opposing forces.
Yeah, cool. So it's that can be a little bit more complex in doing that. Yeah, unpacking something that's already been, you know, packed and focused towards you.
But sometimes, like, I feel, and I say this with humor, like I kind of feel like when I go to voodoo with a problem, quite often its answer is, have you tried having a good wash? And ritual bathing is hugely important. So like keeping yourself clean, keeping your space clean. You know, I have white bed sheets, and, you know, keeping things light and fresh and clean. Like the best cleansing you can do is like vacuuming your house.
Yeah, see that's really practical. It's pretty awesome stuff. Like it's stuff that you don't really associate, but everyday magic is everyday practical magic that everyone can do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like when you think about the people that these systems come from, these like folk practices in these agricultural communities, like that's what their life looked like. And like for me as well, like cleaning the house is such a boring and mundane task. Like I had to start putting weird potions in what I washed the floors with and things like that, just to make it interesting and engaging for me. So making it magic made it more fun as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, so my head's sort of swimming a little bit with just the sheer practicality, mate, of what you're saying. It's just really, really cool. So I'm going to hit you up.
Yeah.
Top three very simple, practical, life-changing.
Yeah.
This is something to think about. Spells that you can share with our listeners. Guys, I got to say, just in the middle of this interview, you really got to come down here, do yourself a favour, and check out Threefold, because I've been just immersing myself in this space, and it is a very, very special space. And chatting to Eryk, wow, like just his insight and a really authentic and a really practical, I guess, attitude and appreciation of the magical space. It just blows me away. But anyway, so I digress from time to time, Eryk. Yeah.
So I think
top three. Here we go.
Here's a really simple spell. So this is a recipe for hot foot powder. And so the idea behind hot foot is that it heats up people's feet and makes them walk out of your life. And it's such a simple recipe. It's salt, sulfur, and what was the third ingredient? Oh, and chili peppers. Gosh.
Of course, chili.
There you go. That's where the heat comes from, right? So you would grind up your chilies, and you would get your, you can get like wettable sulfur from places like Bunnings that you use for gardening, and then just mixing through that with some sea salt. And what you end up with is a powder, and you can say prayers over it and things like that if you wanted to. But what they do is they would put it in people's foot tracks. So when somebody walks out of your house and they've left a muddy footprint, you can put the powder on it, and that will heat up their feet. Or you can put it in their shoes, or you can put it across a door that they cross every day. If you have like a nasty housemate, you can put some hot foot across their door and get them out of there.
Sounds like a really good thing you can use for pranking people, Eryk. Not that I would do that.
I don't know about pranking people with it, but I've
chili in the shoes.
I've certainly gotten rid of some problematic bosses.
Oh,
that I've
really?
had in the past, yeah.
Wow, so there you go. If you've got problems with someone at work and you haven't been able to resolve those issues, give them a bit of the old hot foot, eh?
Yeah, if you Google hot foot powder, you'll come up with recipes and prayers and things that you can incorporate with them. So that's one that I really love. That's a really simple, straightforward spell. Another one, I'm going to give you a book to reference. So the book is by Charles Leyland, and it's called Aradia, or The Gospel of the Witches. It's a public domain text, so you'll be able to find it online for free. But in that book, there is a spell called the Spell of Lemon and Pins. And that's a really good spell because it teaches you how to make something that can be used for blessing or for cursing, depending on how you do the spell. So you take a lemon, an orange, and a mandarin, and under a full moon, you go outside and you throw them up into the air, and you've got to catch the lemon. And if you catch the lemon, you fill it full of pins. And it kind of reminds me of, like, you've seen the oranges that are packed with clovers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of a similar thing. And I think as well, like, when you look at the science behind it, like, lemons are cleansing and have antibacterial properties, so they're a good thing to hang in your house anyway. But you fill it full of pins of all different colors.
Just push it all the way in?
Yeah. You just push them all the way in. But then you can like tie it with some ribbon and hang it in your house, or you can. They're very common as gifts for people that you can give to people to put protection in their house or blessings or those sorts of things. And it has a variation where you boil black-headed pins in wine, but you've got to do it with like a magnifying glass to heat up the wine, which I don't know how you would achieve that, but I've never tried to do it that way. But yeah, you have to get the sun and the magnifying glass and use that to heat the wine up. So, but then you stick the pins in and you bury it on someone's property to curse them and cause them bad luck. So I like that spell because it's versatile and it's good for blessing or for...
All right, there you go.
For
Bit of
banishment.
column A and a bit of column B.
Yeah.
Okay, so lucky last.
Third spell. So this is a really simple one as well. So when we look at spells, they're usually made up of words, gestures, and or components. So the hot foot, you were using your components there. You're using your components when you're looking at the lemon and the pins and stuff. This one mainly is words though. So what you do is you write down Psalm 25 on a piece of paper. And you...
That's not the one that Samuel L. Jackson says in Pulp Fiction, is it? The path of the righteous man, yada, yada, yada.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't actually seen Pulp Fiction, if you can imagine. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I know. I'm so caught up in all these countercultural movements, but like never seen it before.
Wow.
It was a bit before my time.
Okay. Make me feel old.
But they say that there was an unnamed manuscript in the Laurentian Library, and when they read through it, they found this spell, and this is for a patient who cannot sleep. So this is a really good one for mums with new babies who won't sleep at night. But you write out Psalm 25, so it's the one that starts, "Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul." But you write out the psalm on a piece of paper and you place it onto a person's head. And again, of course, like we were saying before, the head's that sort of seat of the spirit. So it calms and cools the head and helps them to get to sleep. So the person who was keeping this manuscript was talking about how he would use it with his patients, his medical patients, because of course, the magicians were always the medics as well back then. So yeah, that's a really simple one for sleep, and I found that with my own niece. I've used that one in the past, and it's actually been pretty successful with her.
Wow, that's excellent. Wow, that's well, there are three absolutely amazing spells that we can use pretty much in everyday life. Just in finishing off here, is there any message that you'd like to pass on to people out there in Brisbane northern suburbs?
Well, I guess, I've always said that the main focus of my work is just re-enchanting the world. And I think that if, there's one person who's listened to this who's thought, oh, I'm going to Google this later, then, what more can I ask for, really? But yeah, I mean, there's so much magic in the world if you know where to look. And, I often talk about the magical underground of Australia that's full of vampires and fairies and witches, and it's out there if you look for it. You've just got to open your eyes.
Yeah, hidden in plain sight, actually.
Yes.
So how can they find you online?
So if you search Threefold, now that's a unique spelling, it's THR333FOLD. So if you Google us or search us on Facebook or Instagram or any of those things, we're on all of those. But we're also located at number 3 6th Avenue in Sandgate.
Coincidence?
So you're welcome to pop in at any time as well.
Mate, excellent. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you, because I've heard a lot about you through the Vampire Court of Brisbane circle. So it's really, really nice because, you've come, very highly recommended. So it is very, very nice to actually finally meet you and come down here and check out your place of business and the seed of where it all happens, the magic seed of the northern suburbs of Brisbane.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's been a ball to chat to you.
Friday nights on BFM with Cosmic Girl and Sifu.
So if you have a Strange Encounters fans, how do you report it?
Well, you can call us. The phone number is on our Facebook page. What is the phone number? You can call us.
I think I've heard reports of that phone number actually materialising in various public restrooms around the place as well.
Oh, really?
Or is that just Bazza's private mobile number?
Maybe he wrote it in his Barbie doll.
For a cosmic time.
Yeah.
Call Bazza on. So what's that number? What's that number for UFO Research Queensland?
So they can contact us through the Strange Encounters Facebook page. Strange Encounters Down Under. They can contact us through the Strange Encounters Down Under Facebook page. They can call us on contact us through UFO Research Queensland Facebook page, or on the direct number, which is 33761780. That's a Brisbane number. And they can also contact us through Bay FM, and the number is...
That number is 3821 0022. That's 3821 0022. And our awesome office staff will be there to take your call during office hours. And we have had a few calls.
We have.
Which is very, very interesting. Bazza is like...
Ordinary people all around Australia are having strange and unexplainable encounters. Join BFM's Cosmic Girl and Sifu each Friday night at 10 p.m. as they explore the fascinating world of paranormal and tales of strange encounters. Extraterrestrials, ghosts, monsters, myths and magic. BFM 10 p.m. Fridays, the heart and soul of the Bay. Oh, and the spirit along the Redlands coast and beyond.